She was already walking when we found her, barefoot in the cane field, past midnight, moving between the rows with the slow certainty of someone following a sound no one else could hear. Every stalk had bent the wrong direction, not with the wind, but downward, toward the roots, as if the earth beneath was drawing a long, slow breath. But beneath her feet, the soil pulsed with a dull red warmth, not a reflection, not bioluminescence, but something that seemed to come from miles beneath the surface. Her eyes had rolled to white, a single clean line of blood traced from her nose to her chin. Céleste Dorival knelt in the warm soil. She pressed her ear to the ground, the way a child listens for a parent's heartbeat, and the ground answered, not in rumble, not in tremor, in language. Perfect Kreyòl, rising through the dirt like water through cloth.
I have been here longer than your suffering, but your suffering, it is so sweet.
But to understand how Céleste ended up kneeling in that field, her mind split open to something beneath the earth that had no business speaking at all. We need to go back 3 weeks. Saint-Domingue, August 1791. The jewel of the French Caribbean, the richest colony on earth if you measured wealth in sugar and measured nothing in blood. The Vodou plantation sat on a shoulder of hillside above Cap Français, its cane fields spreading downslope like green fingers reaching for the harbor. Céleste Dorival had lived 2 lives for as long as she could remember. In the first, she poured coffee for Madame Giroux, pressed linens with hands that never trembled, and kept her gaze fixed on the floorboards. In the second, the one that began after midnight, in the clearing behind the provision grounds, she was a mambo, a priestess, the woman who stood between her people and the invisible world. She had been preparing for weeks. Word had moved through the plantations like root systems beneath soil. A gathering was coming, a ceremony at Bois-Caïman. The spirits would be called. The revolution would be blessed. Céleste's role had been decided. Protection. She was to weave the spiritual armor that would shield the uprising in its first, most vulnerable hours. But something had changed on the Vodou plantation, something in the ground. The trouble had begun with the new sugar works, an expansion Monsieur Giroux commissioned to double his output before the rains. The foundation required fill, and the fill had arrived by cart from the harbor, ballast stones and red soil offloaded from a merchant vessel that sailed the triangle route. The ship sat at anchor in the harbor, its hull still streaked with rust-colored residue from the holds, as if the soil had stained the wood itself, seeped into the grain like something unwilling to let go. The manifest listed the soil's origin as the Gold Coast. No one had questioned it. Soil was soil, but Céleste noticed. The morning after the foundation was laid, she had stepped barefoot across the new floor and felt warmth. Not the warmth of sun-baked stone, but something deeper. Rhythmic. Alive. She pulled her foot back as if burned. The stone where she had stood was damp, though there had been no rain in 11 days. The dreams started that same week. Not for Céleste, not yet. For the field workers. 14 men and women who slept in the quarters nearest the new sugar works had woken on the same night, at the same hour, drenched in sweat and speaking of the same vision. They described a vast red plain, flat and endless, stretching beneath the earth like a second sky inverted. Something enormous had rested on that plain, not sleeping, waiting. And in the dream, it had whispered prices. "You want the overseer dead? Give me the sound of your mother's voice. You want rain for the provision ground? Give me the memory of your name before they renamed you." Celeste had heard these accounts and recognized something that frightened her more than the dreams themselves. Structure. A madness is singular, private, chaotic. This was organized. Something beneath them was making offers. She went to Mambo Augustine. The old woman lived in a lean-to at the edge of the cane, half-blind, missing 3 fingers from a punishment 15 years gone, and more powerful than anyone on the plantation understood. Augustine sat in the doorway, her one good eye catching the light like a polished stone. Augustine listened. Then she said a word Celeste had only heard once before, in a song so old its language was half forgotten, Anba te a. The thing below the earth. The song had warned of a presence carried across the water in the bellies of ships, not a yalwa, not a spirit, with a name you could call or a song you could sing, something from before names existed. Augustine had gripped Celeste's wrist with her 2-fingered hand. "Li pa méchant," she said, "it is not evil. Li grango, it is hungry." Celeste needed to see for herself. That night, while the great house slept, and the overseer drank himself hollow in the storehouse, she crept to the new sugar works carrying a candle and a bottle of rum for protection. The foundation was breathing. Not visibly, but she could feel it through her bare soles, a slow expansion and contraction, the rhythm of something patient. She knelt and pressed her palm flat to the stone. The warmth had traveled up her arm like a vine climbing a trellis. And in that warmth she heard the voice. Not in her ears, in her marrow. It knew her name, both names, the one the Jeru family used, and the one her mother had spoken over her at birth. She pulled away, stumbled backward. The candle went out, but the room was not dark. A faint red luminescence bled from between the foundation stones, pulsing in that same tidal rhythm. And there, on the largest cornerstone, she had seen a mark that stopped her cold. 3 concentric circles, a vertical line through their center, carved deep into stone that had supposedly come from a Gold Coast ballast hold. She had never seen that symbol before, but her body recognized it. A lurch of nausea, a ringing in the inner ear, the sudden absolute certainty that she was being observed from below. For 3 days, Celeste told no one. She performed her duties, pressed the linens, poured the coffee, and each night the dreams spread. 20 sleepers, then 30, then every enslaved person on the plantation waking at the same hour with the same red plain burned behind their eyelids. By the 3rd morning, 2 of the field hands had stopped speaking entirely. They moved through their work in silence, their eyes glazed, red capillaries blooming across the whites like cracks in porcelain. On the 4th night, the entity had changed its approach. It stopped whispering prices. It began offering something far more dangerous. Celeste dreamed. She stood on the red plain, and the presence beneath it spoke clearly, gently, in Kreyòl so perfect it ached.
You want freedom? I can give it to you. This whole plantation, ash, every master, dust. You just need to let me remember through you.
She had woken with her nose bleeding and the taste of iron on her tongue. She understood then. The entity was not haunting them. It was recruiting Every act of cruelty this plantation had ever produced, every lash, every death in the boiling house, every child sold away, had soaked into this ground like rain into limestone, and the red soil from the Gold Coast had drunk it all, concentrated it, grown fat on suffering so vast it had become a kind of currency. The revolution was weeks away. The energy building on every plantation in the northern plain, that crackling, desperate, sacred momentum, the entity wanted to ride it like a river. If Céleste had let it in, the uprising would have succeeded. She was certain of this. The power being offered was real. She could feel it humming in the foundation stones, in the provision ground, in the water table beneath the cane. Absolute annihilating force. But Augustine's warning had circled her skull like a bird over carrion. Li Grangu. It is hungry, and hungry things do not give. They invest. August 14th. The night air had carried the smell of rain that would not fall and smoke from plantations already burning to the north. Bois Caiman was days away. Céleste had made her decision. She gathered what she needed: a salt, a full sack stolen from the storeroom, a machete, a bottle of clarin, and her voice. She walked to the sugar works at midnight, alone. The plantation behind her was silent. Not the ordinary silence of sleep, but something heavier, as though the night itself had drawn a breath and held it. The foundation had been waiting. The red glow was stronger than before, visible through the mortar joints, throbbing like a vein. The air inside the mill sat 10 degrees warmer than the night outside, and it smelled of copper and cane syrup, and something older, mineral and deep, like the breath of a cave that had never known sunlight. Céleste poured the salt. She began at the easternmost cornerstone and walked the perimeter, pouring a thick, unbroken line of white against the red-stained floor. Where the salt touched the stone, the red glow recoiled, pulling back from the white line the way a flame retreats from water. The entity responded. The floor buckled, not violently, but slowly, like a chest filling with breath. The red glow intensified until the walls themselves seemed to bleed light. And the voice came, not from below this time, but from everywhere, the stones, the beams, the salt itself vibrating with sound.
Why do you refuse what I offer?
Céleste had not stopped pouring. Her hands shook, but the line held true. Mwen konen pri o, she answered. I know your price. The voice shifted, became intimate. It spoke in her mother's cadence. The specific rhythm of a woman Céleste had not heard since she was 9 years old, sold to the Giroux household from a plantation in Jérémie. Tifi mwen, it had said in her mother's voice. My little girl. She almost stopped. Her hand faltered over the sack. The salt line thinned to a thread. Then she had remembered what Augustine told her. The thing below does not know love. It knows the shape of love the way a mirror knows a face, perfectly reproduced, perfectly empty. She closed the circle. The clarin went next, poured not as an offering but as a rejection, splashed across the foundation stones inside the salt line, while Céleste spoke the oldest words she knew. Words Augustine had given her that belonged to no Eliway. No tradition Céleste recognized. Words for telling something older than gods that it was not welcome here. Not in this revolution, not in this freedom. The mill screamed, not the wood, not the stone. The air itself, compressed by something retreating violently downward. Céleste had fallen to her knees, ears ringing, blood streaming from her nose and the corners of her eyes. The red light sputtered, dimmed. The foundation stones cracked, not outward, but inward, collapsing like a held breath finally released. And then, silence. She had won. Or the closest thing to winning that a war with the earth allows. But as the silence settled, Céleste reached for the memory of her mother's voice, the real one, not the copy the entity had used, and found nothing. She reached for her mother's name. Nothing. She reached for the sound of Kreyòl as it had been spoken in Jérémie, for the color of the sky on the morning she was taken, for the feeling of small hands holding hers, and every memory crumbled at the edges like paper held to flame. The entity had not taken what was offered. It had taken what it could carry on its way down. The revolution began without the entity's blessing. Human hands, human courage, human fire. Céleste had stood on the hill above the Giroux plantation and watched Cap Français burn. She was free. The word sat in her chest like a stone in an empty room. Around her, others had celebrated, sang, wept, embraced. Céleste watched them and felt the shape of joy without its warmth. A window with no glass, a frame with no portrait. She could not remember what she had lost, only that something was missing, a hollowness behind her eyes where a life used to live. She reached up and touched the iron key around her neck. She did not remember what it opened. Below the hill, in the ruined sugar works, the salt circle had held. The foundation stones were cold and cracked. The red glow was gone. But beneath the salt, if you had pressed your ear to that floor, which no one ever would again, you could still feel it, not a pulse, a patience. The soil had settled downward, retreating to whatever depth it came from, carrying its new memories like a tongue, carrying the ghost of a taste. It could wait. It had always been good at waiting.